Welcome back. In this lecture, we are going to cover anthropogenic climate change. Let's get started. For this lecture, we're going to focus on the recent geologic past, which is the Holocene. The Holocene started about 12,000 years ago, and modern human civilization developed during this epoch. Note that modern humans evolved about 300,000 or maybe a little more years ago, so much earlier than even the top graph shows, which goes to about 150,000 years before present. But humans 300,000 years ago didn't have modern civilization yet. The middle graph to the right shows temperature variation over the last 25,000 years or so, and on this graph you can see the entirety of the Holocene. The bottom graph shows just the last 2,000 years. Climate change is nothing new to the planet, and neither is climate forcing. Climate forcing is any process that influences Earth's climate that originates from outside the climate system itself. These processes include things like orbital cycles, changes in solar output, volcanic eruptions, changes in greenhouse gases, ocean circulation changes, changes to albedo and ice sheets, and many more things. Anthropogenic climate change, also known as global warming, has to do with the changes in Earth's climate due to human activities. Human change is one way humans are affecting the Earth system. Other ways include things like extinctions, overfishing, generation of waste, and so on, but we're really going to focus on anthropogenic climate change. Humans influence climate forcing through changes in albedo and production of greenhouse gases. Things like deforestation and the melting of ice sheets fit within these two broad categories. The Industrial Revolution resulted in huge emissions of greenhouse gases, and we have been going strong on this front ever since. Prehistoric humans may have also influenced climate via agriculture and deforestation. The current change in temperature goes beyond natural forcing, what would be due to changes in the solar sunspot cycle, volcanic eruptions, and so on. The current change in temperature can only be explained by human activities. That is what the graph to the right shows. Climate feedbacks also act to amplify or dampen climate forcing and are some huge unknowns when projecting future warming. But that isn't to say that there aren't other factors that still affect the Earth system that have nothing to do with humans. Volcanic eruptions are a great example of that. Volcanic eruptions cool the climate because they eject a lot of aerosols into the stratosphere. If there are enough aerosols, as happens with major volcanic eruptions, then they increase planetary albedo for a few years. This actually happened fairly recently during the Little Ice Age, a period of regional cooling between the 14th and 19th centuries, particularly pronounced in the North Atlantic region. While the Little Ice Age was caused by the cooling effect of a series of massive volcanic eruptions, it was sustained by changes in Arctic sea ice cover, which led to an increased albedo for the planet. Also, humans have been affecting climate since long before the Industrial Revolution. A good example of this is the greening of the Sahara about 7,000 to 6,000 years ago during the Holocene. The Rudiman hypothesis describes how humans could have influenced Holocene climate via agriculture and deforestation, which would have released large amounts of greenhouse gases and decreased the ability of natural ecosystems to capture carbon dioxide, because they were now either disturbed or cleared. This eventually caused ecosystems like the Green Sahara to become a desert through a positive feedback. We've mentioned greenhouse gases, so let's officially define them now. Greenhouse gases, also known as GHGs, absorb infrared or long-wave radiation. GHGs are transparent to incoming solar radiation, which is short-wave radiation. But once this radiation is absorbed by Earth, it is transformed into long-wave radiation and re-emitted. GHGs make the atmosphere less transparent to outgoing infrared radiation, and thus trap heat, increasing the greenhouse effect. GHGs re-emit the infrared radiation that they absorbed, with some going back down to reheat the Earth and lower atmosphere again, while some of it gets sent back out to space. There is a natural greenhouse effect that keeps our planet warmer than it otherwise would be, and this makes the Earth habitable. The problem is that additional greenhouse gases produced by humans from fossil fuel burning, deforestation, cement production, and so on add to this. Examples of greenhouse gases include carbon dioxide, water vapor, methane, nitrous oxide, and chlorofluorocarbons. Of all the greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide is the one that causes the most global warming on Earth. Not because it has the highest greenhouse warming potential, but because it is by far the most abundant one in our atmosphere. These graphs show global CO2 emissions from fossil fuels, consumption of different energy sources, the top three of which are fossil fuels, and atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration. While there were periods when global fossil fuel emissions slowed or decreased slightly from the previous year during trying economic times or pandemics, the trend is still very much upward. Additionally, atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations due to human activities, shown in the black on the far right, has continued to increase. Here are atmospheric concentrations for several different greenhouse gases since the late 1970s. There was a period of time where it looked like we got a handle on methane emissions, and then we kind of fell off the bandwagon. Nitrous oxide emissions have continued to go up, but we have stopped emitting some CFCs, and this has helped to decrease atmospheric concentrations of those gases. There are lots of sources for methane and nitrous oxide. Let's start with methane. The fluxes to the atmosphere are shown in the image on the left, but I'm just going to describe the processes. Some methane emissions are directly anthropogenic, like fossil fuel production and use, and also agriculture and agricultural waste. Some are a combination of natural and anthropogenic, like biomass burning and biofuel burning. Biomass burning might be from natural wildfires, but biofuel burning is definitely not natural. Additionally, supermassive wildfires that burn larger and hotter because of poor forest management can also go in the anthropogenic column. Now, some methane emissions are natural, but humans might still affect them indirectly. Wetlands and inundated soil or waterlogged soils are a huge producer of methane. Methanogenic archaea produce methane to respire biomass when no oxygen is present. So human activities that warm up anoxic soil that has lots of organic matter in it allows more quote-unquote natural methane emissions. There are also natural methane sinks. There are abiotic and biotic reactions that consume methane. For example, many microbes oxidize methane for energy, and they help to remove it before it warms the planet. On to nitrous oxide. By far the largest anthropogenic cause of nitrous oxide is agricultural soil management. This is because we dump tons of fertilizer on crops. This fertilizer has ammonia in it, and microbes in the soil or in the water that the fertilizer might run off into transform it to other nitrogen compounds, including nitrous oxide. On to chlorofluorocarbons. CFCs are anthropogenic compounds that have been released into the atmosphere since the 1930s. They are used for things like air conditioning, refrigeration, insulation material, propellants, solvents, packing material, and more. In addition to contributing to anthropogenic climate change, they deplete stratospheric ozone, which is important for blocking harmful UV radiation. A ban went into place in 1994, and the ozone layer is slowly regenerating. That is what the figure to the right is showing. It is showing past, present day, and projected future ozone. Not all countries are following this ban as well as they should be, though. Let's get back to CO2. We know that CO2 has varied a lot over geologic time. I have a fairly long-term CO2 record on the left of the last 400 million years. There were periods of time when carbon dioxide concentrations were higher than they are today, but remember, the sun wasn't as strong as it is today, and the Earth system was very different as well. Some of these time periods were much warmer than present-day Earth. Carbon dioxide concentrations haven't been anywhere near as high as they are now for the last 800,000 years. The plot on the right shows that well. Actually, for more than 1 million years, but the plot on the right is using carbon dioxide bubbles and ice, and we have to use other types of records beyond 800,000 years. Just for reference, modern humans evolved around 300,000 years ago. Here is a plot showing carbon dioxide over the Cenozoic era, which covers the last 65-ish million years or so. You can see there is a general cooling trend, shown in the top plot, and decreasing carbon dioxide over this time period, shown in the bottom plot. The different shapes, colors, and so on are different ways of assessing atmospheric CO2 values in the geologic record. We won't discuss them, but there are many different ways. Different records will have different ranges and resolutions, and it helps that many overlap. But modern carbon dioxide levels are headed into values that have not been seen on Earth for 25 million years. And this is all due to human activities. Human species and our immediate ancestors have evolved on a planet with a substantially different climate than the climates that we are headed into. Here's a graphic that shows the ways that humans are affecting the carbon cycle and carbon dioxide concentrations. You can see that the burning of fossil fuels is the biggest way that humans affect the carbon cycle. There are lots of other ways too, like land use changes, but the biggest is burning fossil fuels. The Global Carbon Project has some good figures and explains the processes really well if you want to check it out more. Here are global temperatures as measured by NASA since 1880. They are showing land in red and the ocean in blue. You can see that temperature on land is increasing more than the ocean. This is because water has a high specific heat capacity, so it takes more energy to change its temperature. So the ocean's thermal inertia is actually stabilizing Earth's climate. It's buffering the Earth system from a lot of the change that it would otherwise have. This means that the atmosphere would be a lot hotter if we didn't have as much water as we do on this planet. Here's a map that shows the change in global temperature in 2021 versus what the average temperature was from 1951 through 1980. The added heat energy in the Earth system is due to global warming. You can see that higher latitudes are warming much more than lower latitudes. That's because higher latitudes have a lot of ice that is melting, creating a positive feedback. You can also see that the northern hemisphere is warming more than the southern hemisphere. That is because the northern hemisphere has so much more land mass than the southern hemisphere. So the southern hemisphere has a lot of water, which has a high specific heat capacity, and so it's buffering a lot of the change that the southern hemisphere would otherwise feel. So global warming is the problem associated with increased concentrations of atmospheric carbon dioxide that we tend to hear about in the news, but ocean acidification is also happening. Recall that gases diffuse into and out of the water until the ocean and atmosphere are in equilibrium with each other. So more CO2 in the atmosphere means there's more CO2 in the ocean as well. That means adding CO2 to the atmosphere makes the ocean more acidic. That is, it lowers the pH. The graph on the right is showing atmospheric carbon dioxide in red, carbon dioxide concentration in the ocean is in blue, and then pH in the ocean is in green. This is particularly problematic for organisms with calcium carbonate parts like coral, clams, and so on. A problem related to warming temperatures is sea level rise. The graph on the bottom shows sea level change over time. Sea level is rising due to melting glaciers and ice sheets on land, not oceanic ones. Icebergs, which are in the ocean, are just like ice cubes in a glass and won't raise the water level. But ice on land that melts gets added to the ocean and will increase sea level. Sea level also increases due to thermal expansion due to water warming. The figure on the right is a really good diagram that shows the mechanisms of sea level rise well. Here's a neat website that shows what areas will be impacted by sea level rise. You can check it out and see if any areas you are familiar with will be below sea level in the near future. Earlier, I showed you a map that shows that high latitude areas are impacted by climate change more than low latitude areas. So let's talk a little bit more about Arctic sea ice trends. The melting or freezing of sea ice does not lead to changes in sea level. Remember that sea ice is like ice cubes in a glass of water. But changes in sea ice serves as a very important feedback called the ice albedo feedback. Ice has a really high albedo, while water has a low albedo. So melting some ice creates a positive feedback that will melt more sea ice, locally at first, but this will eventually affect global temperatures. This, combined with the fact that high latitude areas are so cold to begin with, is why high latitude environments are changing more than low latitude environments. There are a number of climate feedbacks, some of which we've talked about, which are visualized on the right. Overall, the net feedbacks are positive, meaning that the climate response to radiative forcing is amplified and warming will be larger than it would have been without any feedbacks. Feedbacks involving the cryosphere are shown in blue on the map. Feedbacks involving circulation patterns are in red, and feedbacks involving the biosphere are in green. We've touched on many of these topics throughout the course, but haven't had a chance to talk about all of them, and unfortunately we won't be able to discuss them all now either. There are several tipping points at which these feedbacks may trigger really big changes. Tipping points are any nonlinear response in the Earth system. This is when abrupt shifts to a new regime are possible. You can consider a tipping point as the point of no return. Let's talk about one of those feedbacks in more depth. This feedback has to do with thawing of permafrost and the destabilization of methane hydrates. The methane in permafrost and methane hydrates is or was produced by archaea, processing organic matter in an anoxic environment. But either the organic matter froze before archaea could decompose it, and so it will create methane, or the methane itself froze before it could bubble up to the atmosphere. Either way, it isn't warming the Earth system when it is still locked up as organic matter or frozen methane. So with permafrost, when permafrost thaws, microbes become active, but the soil is waterlogged and anoxic. So microbes switch to methanogenesis to utilize soil organic matter. This process creates lots of methane. Methane from old methanogenesis was trapped and frozen as well. This is common in the lower layers of permafrost and in frozen lakes. With methane hydrates, the methane is enclosed in a solid lattice of water molecules. This is an ice-like substance due to cold temperatures and extremely high pressure. The methane is trapped and can't escape to the atmosphere in this form. But warming or reducing the pressure destabilizes methane hydrates and releases the methane to the atmosphere. So with each of these processes, warming results in even more of a very potent greenhouse gas getting added to the atmosphere, causing further warming. Now, a large unknown potential feedback to Earth's climate are microbial metabolisms. Biology in general is a huge unknown, but it's estimated that there are 500 million trillion, or 5 times 10 to the 30th, microbes on this planet, so their metabolisms can greatly affect the Earth system. Remember that many microbial metabolic reactions produce and consume greenhouse gases, some of which are shown on the right. We know that methanogens are likely to increase their activities under a warmer climate, but there are a lot of other microbial metabolisms that we really aren't sure about. We can model how a single microbial community may react to changing temperature, precipitation, and so on, but a new microbial community may be favored under a new set of environmental conditions, and we really don't know how to predict that well yet. Remember that we're talking about predicting an entire community, not just one or two microbes. Microbes have many ecological interactions with one another that will influence their activities and metabolisms, and whether or not they're even found in a future environment. Microbes also interact with all the large organisms in an area as well, so we have to accurately predict how all large organisms will exist in the future as well. Something else that we have to consider when we are thinking about climate change is that there is a time lag between what we do now and the response of the Earth system. So even if we stop all emissions of greenhouse gases today, we are still locked into some change. The time between a pulse of greenhouse gases and most of its warming is usually a decade or two. So we won't experience the full effect of today's emissions for a while, but we can still avoid the worst of it. The image on the left is showing the lag between emissions and temperature responses. Note the lag may increase to centuries if the size of emissions also increases. The lag is due to the ocean heat uptake, planetary circulation, and then also feedbacks as well. There are a lot of potential future projections because of unknowns and new feedbacks we discover. The images on the right are showing potential warming, carbon dioxide, sea ice, and ocean pH for different climate change scenarios. These are averages for the entire Earth. But the biggest uncertainty to the future of the Earth system is humans. How will humans behave, and what will we do regarding emissions? But an average change, like the graphs on the previous slide, doesn't mean that the entire Earth will warm evenly. We kind of visited this earlier in the lecture as well. Here are some maps that show potential changes in temperature across the globe. The one on the far left is showing an average 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. The middle is showing an average 2 degrees Celsius change. And the one on the far right is showing an average 4 degrees Celsius warming. You can see that high latitude regions will experience the greatest change, much more than the global average. You may also note that land will experience much more change than nearby ocean environments because of the high specific heat capacity of water. And of course, temperature is not the only thing that is projected to change. Precipitation will also be affected. Here are projected changes to precipitation across the globe under the same 3 warming scenarios. Some areas, like parts of Australia, the American Southwest, and the Amazon, and more places, are expected to become drier and experience more drought. Other areas, like the tropics in Africa, and high latitude areas are expected to become wetter. Climate analog mapping involves matching the expected future climate at a location with the current climate of another, potentially familiar location, thereby providing a more relatable, place-based assessment of climate change. For example, the climate of Los Angeles is expected to become like those currently experienced by various areas in Mexico, and the climate of Portland, Oregon is expected to become like that of Northern California. Here's an online interactive map that you can check out. There are a number of impacts to climate change. Some we've covered, but some we haven't yet. Some of the ones we haven't discussed much or at all include extreme events, such as droughts, floods, extreme heat, and extreme cold. That's right, extreme cold snaps in winter are a function of climate change and this destabilization of the Earth system, despite the fact that the overall trend is warmer climate. Increases in hurricane intensity and frequency is also an effect of climate change that falls in the extreme event category. Biodiversity loss and species extinctions due to shifting climates is another impact, as is increased wildfires. Agriculture is being impacted by climate change as temperature and precipitation regimes shift. Human health is also affected. For example, there are shifts to vector-borne diseases. Vectors are animals like mosquitoes that transfer diseases. Or there's also increased heat stress and malnutrition that are effects or expected effects of climate change. There are also likely to be climate-caused migrations and refugees, like people escaping extreme heat or areas that are threatened by rising sea level, and a host of other socio-economic problems. To better demonstrate why agriculture will be affected by climate change, here are some projected effects on soil moisture under the same various temperature projections we have been looking at. Some areas will have increases, but many areas are going to get drier. This is going to make existing agriculture difficult or impossible in certain regions. Here's a large summary table of different regions on the planet and climate change impacts. You should take a minute to go through it. Darker colors mean that there's going to be a greater impact. The negative sign means there's going to be increasing adverse effects. The joint positive and negative sign means increasing adverse effects and positive effects. So not everything will be bad, but there is definitely more bad than good. The bottom line is that we need to transition the economy to a sustainable, more equitable, and carbon neutral model. We're locked into some change, but we can prevent some feedbacks that could create runaway warming. Multiple alternative renewable energy sources exist and should be developed further. So far, though, it's been pretty hard to match the energy density and continuous availability of fossil fuels. And while significant progress has been made, we are nowhere near the needed emission reduction commitments. This is called the emissions gap, and it is graphed to the right. There's also an equity issue with regard to the climate and climate change. The lifestyles of the most affluent people on the planet are contributing a vast majority of greenhouse gases. Meanwhile, the poorest people on the planet are most likely to endure the most severe consequences of climate change, such as sea level rise and displacement from sea level rise, water availability issues, agricultural impacts, diseases, and so on. The graphic to the right shows emissions as a function of income as both a bar graph and as a pie chart. The takeaway is that the least responsible for climate change are the most vulnerable. It can seem daunting and like there is nothing that we personally can do, but there is actually a lot of things that you can do to reduce your own personal carbon footprint. A carbon footprint is the total amount of greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide and methane, that are generated by our own personal actions. Things that we can do to reduce our own personal carbon footprint include driving more fuel-efficient cars, ideally electric, installing solar panels and wind turbines, eating lower on the food chain. This is because meat farming destroys forests and forests remove CO2 from the atmosphere, and because ruminants generate greenhouse gases, and there's also lots of transportation involved in the meat industry. We can also eat local, which will decrease transportation distances, and so on. There are a range of mitigation and adaptation strategies proposed for climate change as well. Some include geoengineering, which is the deliberate large-scale manipulation of an environmental process that affects the Earth's climate in order to counteract global warming. Geoengineering can broadly be divided into two very different subcategories. The first is carbon dioxide removal. These include things like ocean fertilization, which would add limiting nutrients to the ocean to cause more photosynthesis that would hopefully lead to carbon export and it being buried in the deep ocean. Reforestation would also fall in this category. Or there's other types of carbon capture and storage, which may be artificial rather than stimulating biological processes. The second is solar radiation management. This includes things like solar shielding, for example, stratospheric sulfate aerosol injection, like what happens with volcanoes, or albedo modification, for example, marine cloud brightening. There's also a lot of movements to paint rooftops white. The problems with many of these proposals is that they have unintended consequences. For example, trying to stimulate the biological pump has unintended consequences. And this is because the Earth system is complex and the spheres are all connected. That concludes the material. Let's go through and review the main points. Earth's climate has had natural variations on many different timescales. The last interglacial period, the Holocene epoch, has had a relatively stable climate during which modern civilization developed. The Holocene has experienced some climate change due to a range of factors, including human emissions of greenhouse gases following the Industrial Revolution, known as anthropogenic climate change. There are a lot of consequences of climate change, including rising temperature, melting of glaciers, ice sheets, and sea ice, rising sea level, ocean acidification, increased storms, and so on. The ocean has absorbed a significant fraction of anthropogenic carbon dioxide and most of the heat added to the Earth's system due to global warming, effectively buffering a lot of the change. Multiple climate feedbacks exist in the climate Earth system. There is also a lag effect between emissions of greenhouse gases and the realized temperature change to the Earth's climate. While there are a lot of unknowns when projecting future climate, the biggest unknown is human compliance and activities. High latitude environments will experience the greatest temperature change, causing additional feedbacks. There are a multitude of climate change impacts expected, and the people contributing least to climate change will likely endure the worst consequences. There are many ways that we can reduce our own personal carbon footprint, and ways that we can geoengineer the environment, though there are consequences with geoengineering. Thanks for sitting through the lecture. To test your learning, I suggest you review the material and make sure you can answer these questions and these questions too.